The diamond on my finger was the size of a small planet, a cold, hard moon of captured light. It was supposed to symbolize a dream realized, a fairy tale's glittering finale. But as I sat in the back of the silent Rolls-Royce, watching the manicured vineyards of Napa Valley blur into a green and gold smear, it felt more like a brand, a receipt for a transaction that had just been finalized. His name was Arthur Pendleton. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a man who had built an empire from silicon and steel, a patron of the arts, a figure of formidable old-school gravitas. To me, for the last 3 years, he had been Arthur, my sanctuary, and now, my husband. The ceremony had been a small, obscenely expensive affair at a private estate. The guest list was a who's who of people who mattered, their faces a gallery of polite approval and thinly veiled curiosity. I could feel their unspoken questions like a physical pressure. How did she do it? What does he see in her? How long will it last? My mother, her face a mask of tearful, triumphant joy, kept mouthing, "I'm so proud of you," from her front row seat. She saw a victory. I saw the closing of a gilded cage door. I met Arthur 3 years ago, drowning. I was 22, a bundle of art school debt and deferred dreams, waitressing at a pretentious bistro that catered to the very kind of people I secretly wanted to be. My paintings, large, angry, chaotic splashes of color, were stacked against the damp wall of my studio apartment, unseen and, I was beginning to fear, unseeable. Life was a relentless arithmetic of rent, student loan payments, and the diminishing returns of hope. He came in alone, a tall, older man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that whispered rather than shouted its expense. He ordered the scallops and a glass of Sancerre. He read a biography of Hadrian on his tablet. He was quiet, utterly self-contained, a still point in the noisy posturing room. I spilled his water. Not a drop on him, but a whole glassful onto the table, soaking the pristine linen. I was mortified, stammering apologies, expecting the cool dismissal I'd grown accustomed to from the wealthy. But he just looked up, and his eyes, a pale, piercing blue that seemed to miss nothing, crinkled at the corners. "A deliberate attempt to recreate the Great Flood on a microcosmic scale?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "An interesting performance art piece. I assume the check will reflect the experience?" I stared, then a laugh, unexpected and rusty, burst out of me. "I'm so sorry. Let me get this cleaned up." He waved a dismissive hand. "It's water. It will dry. The world is in no peril." "Bring me another glass and tell me, what are you really doing here?" It was the really that undid me. It implied I was meant for something else. No one had implied that in a long time. I brought his water. He asked about the small paint stain on my apron cuff. I mentioned I was an artist. He asked what kind. I gave my usual defensive, prepared speech about neo-expressionist critiques of modern alienation. He listened, truly listened, then said, "It sounds like you're very angry. What are you angry at?" And I told him about the soul-crushing cost of linseed oil, the gallery owner who told me my work was derivative but market-adjacent, the constant grinding pressure of financial insecurity that left no room for the messy, unprofitable process of creation. He didn't offer platitudes. He just nodded, as if my struggles were a fascinating data set. He left me a tip that was larger than my weekly paycheck. Folded inside the bill was his business card, plain, heavy cardstock with just his name and a number. On the back, he'd written, "Anger is a potent fuel but a terrible foundation. Perhaps we can discuss better architecture." I stared at it for a week. I Googled him. The results were staggering. Net worth, astronomical. Philanthropy, extensive. Personal life, discreet. The word reclusive came up more than once. My pride warred with a desperate, clawing curiosity. In the end, desperation won. I texted the number. Our first date wasn't a date. It was a visit to a private art collection in a penthouse that overlooked the entire city. He didn't just own art, he conversed with it. He spoke about the brushstrokes of a Richter, the emotional violence of a Bacon, the sublime silence of a Rothko with a depth of understanding that left me breathless. He wasn't showing off. He was sharing a passion. He asked my opinion, and he listened to my fumbling answers as if they were gospel. That was the pattern. He became my patron, my mentor, my escape. He paid off my debts. He rented me a sun-drenched studio with north-facing light. He introduced me to curators, to critics. He bought my paintings, not out of charity, but with a shrewd eye, offering critiques that were often brutal, but always jingjun, precise. He saw the talent buried under the anger and patiently chiseled it free. And I fell in love with the mind, the safety, the sheer possibility of him. Was it love? Or was it immense, life-altering gratitude? The line was impossibly blurry. He was 38 years my senior. His body was lean and strong but carried the inevitable marks of time. His world was one of quiet dinners, classical music, and profound silence. My world had been one of noisy bars, cheap wine, and the frantic energy of people trying to become someone. I traded one for the other, and for a long time it felt like the best deal I'd ever made. He never asked for intimacy. It was offered tentatively by me after 6 months. He was a careful, considerate lover, more intellectual than passionate, as if he were studying the map of a new and interesting country. I learned to appreciate the quiet. I learned to wear the clothes he liked, to appreciate the wines he chose, to navigate the hushed, rarefied atmosphere of his life. I became the perfect companion, the perfect protégé. The proposal a year ago was not a question. It was a statement delivered over a glass of 89 Margaux. "Elara," he'd said, swirling the blood-dark wine, "I find this arrangement sustainable. I am not a man for loose ends. I would like to make it permanent. It would provide you with ultimate security, a rightful place in my world, and ensure you are taken care of long after I am gone." It was a boardroom merger proposal. There was no mention of love, of forever, of a shared life. It was about sustainability, security, and legacy. I said yes. Of course I said yes. What else was I supposed to do? The cage was open, but the outside world was a terrifying wilderness of struggle I never wanted to revisit. I chose the gilded bars. The wedding night was at our estate, a sprawling compound of modern glass and reclaimed wood perched on a cliff edge overlooking the Pacific. Staff moved like ghosts, unpacking my things, which looked cheap and garish next to the minimalist perfection of his home. My one large, triumphant painting, the one he had praised as my breakthrough, hung in the vast living room. It looked small and strangely angry in the serene space. Arthur retired to his study after a light supper, explaining he had a conference call with Zurich. "Make yourself at home, my dear," he said, pressing a dry kiss to my forehead. "This is all yours now." I wandered the cold, beautiful rooms, the weight of the diamond heavy on my hand. I ended up in his library, a 2-story marvel of smell and silence. I ran my fingers over the leather-bound spines, feeling like an imposter. My phone buzzed. It was my best friend, Chloe. "Well, how's the first night as Mrs. Moneybags? Send pics of the rock in situ. Is the bed solid gold?" I tried to summon the glee, the triumph. "It's incredible, huge, silent." "Ooh, silent money, the best kind. And Arthur? Is he, still a tiger?" she cackled. "He's on a call with Zurich," I said, my voice flat. A pause. "On his wedding night? Seriously? Wow. Okay. Well, the money doesn't care, right? You hit the jackpot, Elara. You never have to worry again. You can paint whatever you want forever." That was the promise, wasn't it? The entire point of the transaction. Freedom. But as I hung up, the silence of the house felt oppressive. I was the queen of a beautiful, empty kingdom. I had everything I had ever thought I wanted, and I had never felt more alone. The months settled into a pattern of exquisite monotony. My days were my own. I painted in the glorious studio he had built for me, a structure of glass and light with every conceivable tool and pigment at my fingertips. I lunched. I was fitted for clothes by silent, efficient women who brought swaths of Italian fabric to the house. I attended gallery openings on Arthur's arm, where I was now introduced as Elara Pendleton, my wife, and a formidable talent in her own right. People listened to me now. They nodded at my opinions on art. My own paintings, once rejected, now sold for sums that would have made my old self faint. But they sold because I was Elara Pendleton, because Arthur Pendleton had deemed me worthy. I had security. I had comfort. I had a famous, powerful husband who treated me with a distant, impeccable courtesy. He was never unkind. He was just absent. Even when he was in the room, he was miles away, thinking about mergers, acquisitions, the arc of his legacy. Our conversations were pleasant, intellectual, and utterly devoid of passion. We were curator and exhibit, patron and artist, not man and wife. The anger that he had once identified as the core of my art began to seep back. But it was a different kind of anger now. It wasn't the hot, desperate rage of the struggling artist. It was a cold, quiet fury of the gilded prisoner. It was the humiliation of knowing my success was not my own. It was the slow, chilling realization that I had not been rescued. I had been acquired. I started a new painting. It was a self-portrait, but not as I was. It was a figure made of crystal and gold, beautifully faceted, catching the light in 1,000 dazzling ways. But inside the crystal, blurred and trapped, was another figure, screaming. I hid it behind a large canvas when I wasn't working on it. The change began subtly. Arthur started to forget things. Small things at first. A dinner reservation, the name of a critic he'd known for years. He'd be in the middle of a sentence about bond yields and his train of thought would simply derail. He'd stare into the middle distance, a faint frown on his face, until it passed. He dismissed it. Fatigue, he'd grumble. The mind is not the invincible machine it once was. But then came the moments of uncharacteristic confusion. He got lost driving home from his club, a route he'd taken for 20 years. He became agitated during a symphony performance, insisting they were playing the music wrong. He once looked at me across the breakfast table with a blankness that made my blood run cold. "Who are you?" he'd asked, his voice thin and querulous. "It's me, Arthur. Alara, your wife." The confusion cleared, replaced by a flash of something that looked like fear before the familiar mask of composure slammed back down. "Of course. For a moment, the light was behind you. You looked like someone else." We stopped going out. The excuses were always plausible, but I knew. The mighty Arthur Pendleton was afraid of being seen as weak, as fallible. His world shrank to the confines of the estate. His calls from Zurich and Tokyo became less frequent. The house grew even quieter. One afternoon, I found him in his study, staring at a spreadsheet on his monitor. His hands were resting on the keyboard, trembling slightly. The numbers on the screen might as well have been hieroglyphics for all the sense they made to him. "Is everything all right?" I asked from the doorway. He jumped, startled, and turned. The fear was there in his eyes, naked and undisguised. "Alara, yes, these figures, they seem to be misaligned." His voice was a whisper. I walked over and looked. It was a simple quarterly report. To a man who had built a billion-dollar empire, it should have been as simple as reading a children's book. "Perhaps you should call Martin," I said gently, referring to his CFO. "No!" he snapped, his fist hitting the desk. The tremor in his hand was more pronounced. "I will not have that man. I can read my own damn numbers." He stared at the screen, his jaw clenched, a proud king watching his castle walls crumble. And in that moment, the dynamic of our entire relationship shifted. The powerful patron was gone. In his place was a proud, terrified, aging man. And I was no longer the kept protege. I was the only one in the room. The doctor's diagnosis was delivered in hushed, respectful tones in Arthur's study. Early-onset dementia, a rare, aggressive form. Arthur sat in his high-backed leather chair, his posture rigid, his face a granite mask. He took the news as he would a hostile takeover bid, with cold, furious silence. When the doctor left, the mask shattered. He put his face in his hands. He didn't cry. He just made a low, awful sound like a wounded animal. I went to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then looked up at me. The piercing blue eyes were clouded with a terror I could scarcely comprehend. "You should leave," he said, his voice rough. "This was not the agreement. This deterioration. It was not part of the contract." I knelt beside his chair. The diamond on my finger caught the light, the symbol of our transaction. I thought of the freedom I had coveted, the security I had sold my independence for. I looked at this proud, broken man who had, in his own strange way, given me everything and nothing, and I made a choice. "I'm not going anywhere, Arthur," I said, and my voice, for the first time in a long time, was utterly my own. It was not the voice of a grateful child or a careful companion. It was the voice of a woman. "The contract is being amended." The next 2 years were a long, slow, heartbreaking negotiation. I became his carer, his protector, the guardian of his dignity. I managed his empire with the help of his bewildered but loyal board, learning on the fly, using the sharp analytical skills he himself had taught me. I fired the vultures who circled, sensing weakness. I became to the outside world the formidable Alara Pendleton, the fierce young wife defending her husband's legacy. At home, it was different. There were good days, where his old sharpness would return for an hour, and we would talk about art or history, and it would feel like it used to. And there were bad days, days of confusion, of anger, of heartbreaking vulnerability. He would sometimes ask for his mother, who had been dead for 40 years. He would sometimes not know me at all. Through it all, I stayed, not out of duty, not for the money, not even for gratitude. I stayed because in the ruins of our transaction, something real had begun to grow. A tenderness, a fierce, protective love that had nothing to do with sugar or patronage and everything to do with shared humanity, with the brutal, beautiful intimacy of witnessing someone's undoing and choosing to hold their hand through it. I found the self-portrait, the one of the crystal woman, a year into his illness. I had forgotten about it. I showed it to him on a good day. He studied it for a long, long time.
"It's you," he said finally, his voice soft. "Trapped. By all of this. By me." "It was how I felt," I admitted. "Once." He turned his faded blue eyes to me. "And now?"
I looked at him, at the man who was both a titan and a child, my keeper and my charge. "Now I feel necessary." He nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the parchment of his cheek. He reached out a trembling hand and covered mine. It was the most genuine gesture of love he had ever offered me. Arthur died on a quiet Tuesday morning, with the sun streaming into his bedroom. He went peacefully, his hand in mine. He knew who I was until the very end. The funeral was a massive, somber affair. The world mourned a giant. I mourned my husband. After the will was read, leaving me everything, of course, a fact that caused a ripple of shock, though no surprise among his family, his lawyer handed me a sealed envelope. He asked me to give this to you. He wrote it just after the diagnosis. Alone in the library, the scent of his books all around me, I opened it. The handwriting, once bold and decisive, was shaky and frail. "Alara, if you are reading this, I am gone. And you, against all logic and self-preservation, stayed. I know why you married me. I am not a fool. I offered you a world, and you, in your brilliance and desperation, took it. I thought I was acquiring a beautiful, stimulating companion for my final act, a final, exquisite piece for my collection. I was wrong. You were not a piece to be collected. You were the curator of my end, the guardian of my ruin. You saw the man behind the empire, at his very worst, and you did not flinch. You showed a strength I never possessed. The world will say I took care of you, but we will both know the truth. You took care of me. You were the best, most unexpected investment I ever made, not for what you gave me, but for what you revealed of yourself. Thank you for amending the contract. Arthur." I folded the letter, holding it to my chest as the tears finally came, not of grief or relief, but of a profound, complex acceptance. I am Alara Pendleton, widow, billionaire. Once a sugar baby who married her daddy. Now, finally, myself. The painting of the crystal woman hangs in my new downtown loft, a reminder of who I was. In my new studio, surrounded by the vibrant, chaotic energy of the city, I work on a new series. It's not angry. It's not trapped. It is expansive, messy, and full of a hard-won, complicated light. The transaction is complete, but the story, my story, is just beginning. It started with a diamond and a deal, but it ended with a choice, a letter, and a love that was never part of the bargain, but became the only thing that was real. I had married my sugar daddy for security. I had stayed with Arthur for love. And in the end, I had found myself,